Piano method books have popularized a few commonly accepted ways of learning how to read music at the piano. For instance, you can use flashcards to memorize these things. Nothing wrong with that. There's a very common axiom, almost accepted as truth by many old-fashioned piano teachers, that you should use mnemonic devices to name the lines of the staff and the spaces of the staff. In my studio, for the bass clef, we used all cows eat garbanzo beans. Many books start with middle C. And so the idea is that you're going to put your thumbs on middle C, and then we'll just add one note at a time, and eventually you'll learn all the notes if you can get all the way up or if you can get all the way down. First of all, middle C lives on an imaginary line called a ledger line, which is immediately confusing for people. Also, nobody has ever thought it was fun to put both thumbs on middle C and share it like this in the middle of the piano. I'd never met any kid who ever thought that wasn't frustrating, and I never met any adult who thought that was a reasonable idea when you've got 88 keys on the keyboard. Like, why are we referencing one thing with both thumbs? Some method books will use what they call landmark notes, where they call it this G and this F, or all of these C's. And I think that's getting way closer. If you're using a method book and it uses landmark notes, you're going to be much better off. But what if I told you I could teach you to read music with just one chord, one secret chord? You know that Leonard Cohen song? It's a G7. There's nothing secret or sacred about this chord. It does please the Lord, I think. But if we play a G and reference that note and then just build a chord off of it, with these four notes, you're playing a G7 chord. That's this chord right here. And then in the left hand, play this G and play a G7 chord. You'll notice already that that is 4 of the 5 lines of the staff. Now, this is a very cool chord because if I put an imaginary mirror right here down the center of the staff, you would see that it's the same picture reflected over the mirror. It's a mirror image. And it's the only chord that is the same when it's a mirror image. Then if you take that chord and just move everything down one note, that's all the space notes right here. Move it towards the inside of the piano, one note, that's all the space notes. And then if you keep going from there, move in one more, that's the inside lines. So there, you now know how to read music. One chord, move it over again, and then you've just played all of the notes. So if you can remember this G and this G, you're going to be way better off than referencing middle C. It's so much better than middle C. First of all, middle C is not even on the staff. You have to draw an imaginary line to get middle C. Also, your left hand is much more likely to play this left hand note G than it is to have your thumb on middle C, right? It's just, that's how piano music works. Your left hand is going to be around here and your right hand is going to be around here. That's the general concept. If you want to get way into this, I'm giving a beginner bundle of courses to people who join my Measure by Measure program. So if I ever put off this vibe of, because I know I talk about classical music a lot, if I put off a vibe of you think you need to learn how to read music before you check out my program, this is for absolute beginners. And then I'll launch you into some sheet music that's really appropriate for people who are coming right into this. And I'll show you some drills that take seconds to minutes that will help you reinforce this stuff. Now, what commonly happens when people learn to read music is they're given sort of a sheet music whiplash. They're shown how to identify notes, but they actually can't see, how does this benefit me when I'm playing the piano? There's such an emphasis on note identification with flashcards, name the note. With mnemonics, name the note. The problem is, by naming notes, you train your brain into thinking that that's what you want to see happen. And that's not what we want to have happen, actually. No proficient piano reader is naming notes as they go along. It's automatic. And that reminds me of an experience I had when I was playing high school jazz band. I was playing the piano for them. It was very early in the morning, granted, but the teacher was talking, he was instructing, and he was talking to the horns, and he turned to me and he said, give me an E flat. He wanted an E flat. And I had to look at the keyboard. I was like, E flat. And then I gave it to him and he was like, that took way too long. Now, what's funny about that is at that point in my life, I was a pretty proficient sight reader. I was doing a lot of sight reading, playing for the choirs for the high school. And I was spending hours a day learning classical music. And I was spending most of my time with sheet music. And I thought in that moment, as he continued talking to the horn players, I was like, why did they take so long? I felt stupid. And I was like, if he'd shown me the staff and pointed to this E flat, and said, play that, I would have done it instantaneously. And that made me realize that we're not going for identifying and naming the notes. What we're going for is an actual action, a response to what we see. So if all you do is name notes, you're introducing a step that doesn't belong there in your piano reading. Once I began teaching landmark notes and naming the lines of the staff instead of the note names, it was a huge game changer for me. So on a staff, and you can pretend this is all blank, but I call these the outside lines. And the outside line here on the top represents a particular F, not just what is this note? F. Okay, find an F. Which F is it? And this is a common thing I would see as a piano teacher too, is like, what is this? And then people would just find any old F, but the outside line corresponds to this note. This outside line corresponds to this note. We also could name the clef lines. So I could say treble clef line, and that's a G, not it's G, but it's a clef line, or the clef line here, the bass clef line. Once I started naming the lines, and having students figure out where those are on the piano, the game changed from naming the notes to corresponding the lines of the staff to the keyboard. Now, before you go crazy in the comments section, because it's something I know about piano teachers, that they feel really strongly about things. I'm not saying it's a bad idea to name notes. In fact, I think it's a really good idea to make a copy of some sheet music and use that as a worksheet, take a pencil and just start writing in the note names. Don't practice with that. Don't use that sheet to practice at the piano. It's just an exercise, it's just a worksheet. Once you've named all the notes, throw them away. With the caveat that as you're doing that, you're visualizing the keyboard. You're not using mnemonics, you're visualizing the keyboard and where are these things on the piano. But that exercise alone is not going to teach you how to read music faster at the piano. What will? Okay, I'm going to teach you a really fun principle. I call this the first note object principle. Okay, I've got a piano, I've got a pencil. I'm going to put this pencil on just any surface. And we do this sort of thing all the time, probably thousands of times a day, especially think about when you're in the kitchen, how often you just like pick something up without even looking at it. Now, I know that that pencil's there and I can just kind of pick it up like that. Now, what I see, and I observe this a lot, when people are learning to read music at the piano, they introduce all sorts of tension and extraneous motion to what they're doing at the piano. They see a note on their sheet music and then they kind of look around for it and then they hunt, where does my hand go? And there's all this extra motion. Now, the first note object principle is when you see a note on the staff, you have to come from a place of relaxation at the piano. So we're going to treat that first note as an object. You don't want to move until you know where you're going to go. So take some time and just sit comfortably at the piano, look at that first note, think about where it is on the keyboard. You don't have to name it, just know where it is on the keyboard, and then lift your hand and go right to it. And that motion should look very similar to, I'm just going to pick up an object and play it. There's no extra motion of like, where is my hand going? It's there. It's just, where is that on the piano? Play it. The goal is to make your movement to the first note very smooth and relaxed. When you do that, if you start from a place of relaxation, suddenly you're replacing anxiety and extra body tension with a sense of calm, a sense of confidence when you're playing. And then you just kind of go, you start to read intervallically from there. People who play Sudoku, people who play Sudoku, who get good at it, not because the puzzle is the same every time, it's because they just get used to thinking in how do you solve Sudoku. They just get used to thinking in this logical way of like, okay, I can just do it. And they get better and better, and they get faster and faster at solving Sudoku puzzles. That could be the benefit of a method book. But the problem with a method book is they don't give you enough variety of pieces to play. You turn the page and you're like, oh, this song starts in exactly the same place as the last one. You turn the page, it's like, we're going to teach you a whole bunch of songs in the key of C. And then we're going to teach you a whole bunch of songs in the key of G. And then in F. And they only pick those three keys for some reason. And I think you're forgetting how to read music while you learn skills. You can practice this first note object principle with absolutely any music. It doesn't have to be all in the key of C. In fact, there's a particular collection of classical music that I think is really good for learning how to play the piano. It's the library of Measure by Measure. So if you check that out, it's music that I've selected specifically for beginner and intermediate piano players that I think is really good at building skills, but it's also really good at building your reading skills. I'm a little bit nervous to like let the comments go on this one because I know piano teachers will start bickering about like, oh, that's not how I did it. But, and it's not, honestly, it's not how I learned, but it's how I started teaching after a while, and it just went so much better. So check out the most unhelpful habit for you that I think actually applies to this, and also get working on your scales. This is a simple trick on how to remember all the scale fingerings. Okay, bye.